whenever he could, he got all the works of a composer. Ippolitov Ivanov gave him an autographed copy of A Year in the Life of A Year in the Life of Schubert. That's not exactly the title. It's a piece that he wrote in 1928 on the, I'm going to get this right, it was the centenary of whose death? Beethoven? 27. It was 27 or 28, yeah. But what happened was that the story goes that Schubert and a bunch of friends go to Beethoven's funeral, and then they all kind of joke, well, who's going to be the next one to die? And they wrote, this poem was written on this, and of course Schubert was the next one to die, but Ippolitov Ivanov wrote this piece and gave an autographed copy, and we have that in the Fleisher collection. He got that on that trip to the Soviet Union. But anyway, he got all this music. We got 2 Icelandic works from John Leifs during that trip. In the 30s, a big project that happened was the WPA. And in the WPA, Works Progress Administration, basically in the United States, this was, of course, it was the Depression from 1929, so forth. WPA was a government-sponsored project, actually a number of projects over many years, mostly involving infrastructure, building roads, building buildings, and things like that. But a big component to this was music. So there were federal music projects all around the country, centered mostly in the big cities. And there was one in Philadelphia, and it was centered around Edwin Fleisher and the Fleisher Collection. So what did they do? Edwin Fleisher, although he loved music, wasn't really up on contemporary music, but his then new curator, Arthur Cohn, you know the name Arthur Cohn? Longtime head of serious music, quote-unquote serious music at Carl Fischer. But at that point, in 1935, he was a young whippersnapper and is the new curator of the Fleisher Collection at the library. Arthur Cohn said, well, you know, the collection is nice, but you don't have any contemporary music. You got to have contemporary music. You got to have American music. You know, it's nice having Schubert and Ippolitov Ivanov and all that stuff. So what they did was Arthur got names of composers and enlisted Aaron Copland to give him names of composers and names of composers who were at festivals and universities, and they sent letters all around the United States, hundreds of letters, saying, give us your work and we will copy it. So scores came in from all around the country, and Fleisher hired music copyists to extract the parts. Can you imagine this? They had upwards of 70, 80, 90 copyists working at times, just plowing through stuff, opening the scores, copying the parts out. It was proofread, it was supervised. They'd send the scores back to the composer. Now their works and parts were in the Fleisher collection. It was an amazing project. Hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of works came in that way. The other part of it was Arthur Cohn went to a lecture at the Curtis Institute of Music, which is in Philadelphia, and there was a very interesting musicologist and author who was speaking at the Curtis Institute. And Cohn was very taken with him. The guy's name was Nicholas Slanimsky. And they got to talking afterwards. They went out to dinner. And Slanimsky said, you know, your collection is really nice, but what it really needs is Latin American music. He says, there's really not a lot of Latin American music in there. He says, you need that. So they went, and Cohn talked to Edwin Fleischer, the result of which Fleischer bankrolled Slanimsky to visit virtually every country in Central and South America, starting in 1941. He was there for a couple months. and he visited composers, libraries, universities, government institutions, and shipped scores and hundreds of scores back to Philadelphia. What we did in Philadelphia was we either photostated them or microfilmed them, shipped them back, and then copied the parts. So we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Latin American pieces, which is why I say we are the largest depository of Latin American orchestral scores and parts in the world, because, you know, in one place. And it was all done during this time period. So what you have from 1929, when he gave the collection, at that point the number of orchestral titles was maybe 3,000. Through these collecting forays, you get to the point where now we have 21,000 titles. We are the world's largest lending library of orchestral performance material. So I have to say all those words, okay? So we're a lending library, right? It's orchestral performance materials. Obviously, there are libraries that have more titles than we have. Library of Congress, right? BBC. But as far as scores and parts for lending them out, we're the biggest in the world. We didn't always lend them out. At first, Fleisher just wanted it to be used by the Symphony Club because it was the Symphony Club's library. That got changed, the deed of gift got changed, and so then it could only be used by people who could come in and pick the stuff up. Then that changed, and so it became an actual lending library in due course. Lots of interesting things happen, you know, around the WPA and other copying projects, and one is the Ives Fourth Symphony. I don't know if anyone knows when was the Ives Fourth first recorded. Anyone know? Premiered and recorded?
1967?
Five, very close. 1965. Yeah, I think I think he wrote it around 1919 or something. He probably finished around 1918, 1920. But it was Stokowski and the American Symphony Orchestra, recorded in '65, and it was premiered right around there. And that came about only because it was copied at the Fleisher Collection. Now, I don't know how much you know about Charles Ives or about his manuscripts, but it has since been recopied 2 more times. And so the rental set you get now is not what we have and is not what was recorded. But at the very least, to give you one example, there's one part where you need 2 conductors to conduct it, because they're in different rhythm, not only different rhythms, but different meters and so forth. And there have been some conductors who have done it now with just by themselves, but at that point you needed 2 conductors. And that came about because of the work at the Fleisher Collection. Because basically they saw this music, they didn't know how to play it. They had no idea how this was going to happen, let alone figuring out what notes were the right notes and what notes were wrong and what should be changed. And is this for the trumpet or is that for the 4th horn? Because they're kind of squished together, you know. And all that was done at the Fleisher Collection. The curator at that time was Ted Cedar, and one of the copyists who did a yeoman's job of the copying was Romulus Franceschini, who was my predecessor as assistant curator. When I started there as a copyist, Romulus was the assistant curator, and then he retired, and I took his place. So there's the Ives Fourth Symphony. It's always delightful to me when things like that happen, when someone calls us for something like the Charvenka, or a recording project like the Ives happens. And it happens over and over again.